Welcome to the first edition in Cancer Together's educational video series. If you are new to our organization and its mission, our goal is to create a safe space for youth to reflect, discuss, and learn more about the impacts of cancer. With this series, we sincerely hope that you are able to learn more about cancer beyond just a general textbook definition and its characteristic symptoms, and more about topics such as what differentiates one cancer from another, what are the different types of treatments and how are they determined? What is it like living with cancer? And how can we make an impact? For each video in this series, including this one, there will be a Quizlet and an educational game posted shortly after the Edpuzzle is online for you to look back at the information and review it in a fun, interactive way, and maybe even teach someone else a bit about cancer. With that being said, let's jump in. For today's video, we will be having a quick introduction to cancer, with a segue being from some general biostatistics for anyone who is unfamiliar with this topic and would like some background on what cancer is like in the world around us today. For reference, these statistics were gathered and found from Globocan. In this past year, female breast cancer has surpassed lung cancer as the most commonly diagnosed form of cancer. Overall, the incidence rate of cancer has been 2 to 3 times higher in both genders. In this past year, in 2020, there's also been 19.3 million new cancer cases, with 1.2 million being melanoma skin cancer alone. And let's just pause there for a second. I find it so shocking that the world around us has become so rooted with cancer. And I know that many may not be that, let's say, shocked by how high this number is because of the rapid desensitization of statistics involving numbers like this, especially with regards to the pandemic. So let's just take a step back and look at it from a different perspective. 19.3 million people make up a quarter of the UK's population, and it's more than 1/2 of Canada's population. And I find that so startling that cancer has become so widespread in the world around us, and it's expected to rise even more because, according to the next statistic, in 19 years from now, in 2040, the global cancer burden is expected to rise 47% from the current statistics we have in this past year of 2020. And I find it so alarming that cancer is supposed to be on the rise even more in 19 years from now, just like that. And I think it's so much of a larger incentive for us to learn more about the impacts of cancer and what cancer is, and for us to learn how we can help the cause. And I sincerely hope that this video series will be at least helpful to one person and help them find out more ways to help out. And let's jump into the direct content of today's video, the cell cycle and its impacts in relation to cancer. So what is the cell cycle? It's basically a series of stages in the cell that enable it to divide into 2 new cells. And it's so important for us as living people and living organisms that we are able to duplicate our own cells, because we start out as little children and we grow all the way to adolescence to when we're even senior citizens, and we need to be able to duplicate our own cells in order to continue to grow and develop. And we needed to heal just our basic own injuries, like let's say it's as simple as a paper cut. The cell cycle is utilized in order to replace those damaged cells and to fill that empty space and to heal that wound. And I find that so amazing. As you can see here, the cell cycle is made of 4 different stages, the first 3 phases of which are non-dividing. G1 is when the cell physically grows larger. S phase is when the DNA replicates itself. G2 is when the organelles enlarge themselves in preparation for division. And M phase, which stands for mitosis, is when the cell actually divides. Now, if you notice, there are these 3 red tick marks, and you might be wondering, what are they? Well, these are the places in the cell cycle where the cell is stopped from continuing on into the next phase in order to check for any errors to prevent any mutations from occurring. In the scenario that it does have an error or a few, it will be halted right here and will not be allowed to continue into the next phase of the cell cycle and instead it's going to enter a non-dividing phase. But if it has no errors or any mutations, then it'll be allowed to continue on into the next stage and on until it reaches the next checkpoint. And the same applies here. If it's able to pass through here, then it'll continue on into the M phase, and if it matches that checkpoint, then it will successfully divide. So as you can tell, checkpoints are very important in the cell cycle for regulation of whether a cell is able to continue dividing or if it stops. So let's look at that a bit more in depth. Here's a bit more information for what occurs at each of these checkpoints. There are basically these proteins called cyclin and cyclin-dependent kinases that bind together and form what's called the maturation promoting factor, or MPF. So basically, when there is a high concentration of cyclin, the MPF activity corresponds with that, and it's going to trigger a go-ahead signal at that checkpoint that enables the cell to continue on into the next phase of the cell cycle and potentially be able to successfully duplicate itself if it passes all of these checkpoints, depending on whether it is enough cyclin concentration that, when compared to the MPF activity, provides the go-ahead signal. Now, you might be wondering, are there any rules in regards to when a cell divides or not? Yep. So there are these two cell rules called density-dependent inhibition and anchorage dependence. Density-dependent inhibition is basically when the cell is going to form a single layer on the surface and it's going to stop the cell cycle once it does so. And anchorage dependence is that in order to start the cell cycle and to start dividing, the cell has to be attached to a substratum. Now, if these two cell rules are not met, but still the cells continue to divide and continue on with the cell cycle, that results in what's called unrestricted division of abnormal cells, which is what we define cancer as. And I think that's a good segue to stop for today, and thank you for joining us today and learning a bit more about cancer involved in this introduction, and we hope to see you in the next video. There will be a game and a Quizlet posted shortly after. The game will most likely be in the form of quizzes, and these will be posted most likely in the next day if it has not been already. For our next video, you'll find out when the next video will come out with regards to the Instagram teaser. Within a week after it's posted, do expect the next video in this series along with a tiny little description of what this next video is going to be about. Again, thank you for joining us today, and if you have any questions, thoughts, or any suggestions, or any topics you'd like us to cover, please indicate so in the next part of this Ed puzzle where it stops.